Excellent. So, welcome. So here are the 9 separate partners that are involved in this Strategic Research Council project, or 8 now. One had to leave early on, I forgot about that. We are a very multidisciplinary team involving ecologists, political scientists, geographers, both human geographers and physical geographers, right through to people with expertise in design, planning, etc. And when we think about nature-based solutions, we are thinking about not only existing or modified nature, such as forests or lands that have been modified by different forms of human intervention, but also new forms of nature in urban areas, whether it be green roofs, green walls, right through to stormwater swales, etc. And there's a range of definitions of nature-based solutions out there, but the definition that I consistently refer to is the IUCN definition, which is actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. And one of the reasons we've selected this definition over others, such as the European Commission or the United Nations definitions. It is putting biodiversity in focus, as opposed to only human well-being benefits. Why this is significant? Well, the European Commission has invested, up until last year, over 755 million euros in nature-based solutions, involving 88 projects, 1,538 partners and 79 countries. So this is one of the biggest investments that the Commission and the European Union has made in nature in since the start of the whole the EU. And so the Commission expects that these resources not only go for public good, but also that this investment is leveraged on by industry and by other organisations. But one of the key points I want to raise today is that the emphasis on nature-based solutions co-benefits has really been co-benefits for humans. So there's a focus on human subjectivities and human needs and wants. And I've been part of that group that have been pushing these co-benefits frameworks. For example, in 2017, we developed the first co-benefit assessment framework for the European Commission, where we emphasised NBS is not only providing biodiversity benefits, but benefits for water management, coastal resilience, green space, air quality, urban regeneration, participatory planning and governance, social justice and social cohesion, public health and well-being, green jobs, etc. And these co-benefits or these solutions are driven by societal challenges or urban challenges. And the argument is that by supporting ecosystems and biodiversity, you also can address aspects of the social system by providing key benefits and co-benefits. But what I've come to realise in the last couple of years is that we're really only focusing on the co-benefits for humans through these frameworks. And so I've been reading a lot about multi-species justice over the last few years as a gateway to understand benefit in a much wider way, emphasising the importance of relationships and benefits that emerge through relationships. And so some of the key questions we're trying to address in MUST are, how do we change the subject of justice to represent and give agency to both humans and other species in NBS decision making? And how do we start to fairly distribute the benefits and costs of these NBS across humans and other species? And we're not just thinking about native species here, or so-called rare or threatened species, but also companion animals and those animals which may be unloved or uncared for. And we argue that we require a multi-species justice lens to do this, which requires considering the interest and well-being of other species in decision-making. But it's not only about evaluating benefit or impact, but also actively striving for conditions that support the flourishing of diverse beings. I'll come back to this in a minute. We've recently published a paper in Nature Urban Sustainability where we look at how we can apply MSJ in this NBS planning context. What are some of the tensions, but also what are some of the prospects going forward? And in this paper, we try to unpack MSJ in the context of representation, which is defined as opportunities for meaningful involvement to include diverse forms of communication, as well as identities and needs across humans and other species. Distribution, ensuring fair and equitable sharing of social, economic, spatial, and environmental risks and benefits. And thirdly, agency. How do we make space for multiple voices to act in nature-based solutions planning? And we argue that these things together represent MSJ. And I'm now going to focus on the finished case, and that is how can we bring these ideas of MSJ not only into NBS planning generally, but into the specific policy focus of nature restoration. And we're drawing upon this case because it's currently very applicable. Last year, the European Union gazetted the Nature Restoration Regulation, which requires all EU member states to introduce restoration measures that cover at least 20% of the land, sea, and ecosystems specified in the law, and all ecosystems, that's by 2030, and all ecosystems in need of restoration by 2050. It sounds very ambitious. The Article 8 link to urban areas has been watered down between the draft and the finally approved version. But what it has led to is a lot of activity in Finland and in other member states, because all member states need to create what's called a nature restoration plan. And that plan has to be not only approved by the national parliament, but also by the European Commission. And so in Finland, they have this Gantt chart or timetable where between August last year and the middle of this year, they're undertaking preliminary studies. There's also a set of working groups established linked to each article in the law that are meant to provide restoration actions that meet each of the targets in the law. Then the draft actions developed by those working groups will be subject to political deliberation and then approval. Interestingly, stakeholder engagement and communication has to be done across this planning process, but what we're seeing is that stakeholders are largely limited to diverse human actors, specifically the general public, different industry bodies, right through to NGOs, etc. Other species, the representation of other species is not in the equation like we would hope under the MSJ lens. And so one of the overarching aims of our study is to explore whether and how immersive dome encounters can help represent the interrelated needs of humans and other species when envisioning multi-species futures in support of nature restoration. And why we were looking at dome environments here, or audiovisual immersive environments, is we want to get different stakeholders to think not only about what they want to see in terms of restoration today, but also what do we want them to see in terms of restoration by 2050? And what does that mean for the interlinked needs of humans and other species? And so we're tending not only to targets and co-benefits, but also relationships associated with these different futures. Now, I'll put this up. It's quite a complex figure, and I'm not going to explain everything, but I was quite inspired by the work of Shaka and colleagues of 2022 when they were starting to think about, well, how do we start to deliberate and engage diverse actors around multi-species justice. And what they argue for here is that we have to look at the tensions between my role as self and my role as a human other, and equally the role of non-human others in our engagement with multi-species justice. And where we see ourselves along these spectrums will affect our empathy, so empathy for other species, but also the empathy for humans. Whether we see the issue as proximal, like close to us, or distant to us, and whether we ascribe that issue as something of high responsibility or low responsibility. In this framework, they talk about the role of ethical encounters, visual encounters, political encounters, and embodied encounters as a way to nudge us or change the lens through which we understand MSJ. But what is missing from these types of frameworks is the role of acoustic encounters, which we're specifically interested in work package 1 of the MUST project, as well as this notion of place change. A lot of the work on MSJ is focusing on existing nature or current human nature relationships or interspecies relationships. What we really want to get to in this project is also relationships relating to future environments that currently may not exist. So in that light, and this also links to some other work I've been doing around sense of place, where we've been arguing in this book, for example, the need to consider the complex web of relationships among people-place relationships or sense of place and place change, but equally considering both human and more than human materialities in the context of our relationships to place. And so when I talk about acoustic encounters here, we draw upon ideas from ecoacoustics, where they divide encounters between biophony, so the collective sound that is generated by all living organisms in a particular habitat excluding humans. Anthrophony is the sound generated by human activities, whether intentional or incidental. And geophony, which is the non-biological natural sounds that come from the earth itself. And this links to ideas around representation in MSJ, and also links to the role of immersive environments in fostering representation. And there's a whole literature on virtual environments and immersive environments, which I won't bore you with today, but just to say that in this literature, there are technologies for multi-sensory engagement, so using sight, sound, and sometimes touch, smell, or motion to deepen immersion and experience. This is technology driven, often by VR, AR, mixed reality, projection mapping, and in the case of what I'm presenting today, dome theatres. So we've been through a number of iterations of creating what we're calling the MUST platform or MUST dome. This is a spherical space. It's 6 meters wide by 3.6 meters high, can have up to 10 people in it at one time. Last year, we had our alpha version, which we used in partnership with both children as well as adults in Turku. At that point, we only had 3 projectors and we did not have a full sail over the dome. But what we did in this first attempt was to try to represent existing urban nature environments in Turku on a spectrum from those which were less modified to those which were highly modified by humans. And we tried to represent 3 things in each of these dome interventions. One was the habitat or the ecosystem, another was the species, in this case the wood pigeon, and the third being the spectrograph, which is representing the acoustic patterns or the frequencies of sounds of species in that environment. And these things were all synced together. So the visuals were synced with the sounds. I had a very large sound file, which sadly I could not share today. But these scripts ran for about 10-15 minutes. And it was really amazing in the case of these young kids, how engaged some of them were. For example, some of the kids were starting to follow the spectrograph as it was changing between human sounds and different bird species sounds. and they could see how these species varied across different habitat types and ecosystem types. We also had some engagements, not so formally, with the MUST research team, as well as the general public through what we're calling MUST festivals, where the general public could come and experience these immersive environments and the soundscapes associated with them. We did do some qualitative research as part of some of the initial work, and we have not fully coded it. That's part of the book chapter we're writing for the Oxford Handbook as we speak. But I just took out some quotes in relation to the question of how people see themselves and how they see themselves in relation to birds. And these are four separate respondents. One said, I would think that the birds that are there now in my environment are already in a kind of symbiosis with these cars and others. I'm so used to that noise or the sound of the cars that they don't notice it that way. So, second one, if I was a bird, I would probably wish for less human and traffic noise. Those sounds can be quite overwhelming, and a quieter environment would make it easier to communicate with other birds. Third respondent, if I imagine myself as a bird, I'd like to hear more natural sounds like the rustling of leaves or the wind. These sounds are calming and part of the natural rhythm of life. And fourthly, if I were a bird, I'd want to keep the bird songs and maybe amplify them. They're not just beautiful, but essential for communicating among birds. So these four different representations of how humans are seeing other birds in relation to the biophony, the anthrophony, and the geophony being played in these dome environments. So it gives you, in other words, the dome provided another way for both the general public and for children to take perspective on not only their relationship to the natural world, but the relationship of other species in those environments. We're now moving to the beta version. So we've recruited a boat sail development company in Finland to create a customized sail surface for the dome. It's we're testing it as we speak. What this enables us to do is create a full immersive experience, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But it also enables us to better engage with future places and the relationships between humans and other species in these future places. And I just want to acknowledge the work of Satu, who's in the room today. And I've taken this from Satu's PhD, but Satu's really looking at developing a methodology for co-creating desirable multi-species visions by combining envisioning practices of environmental science. And that's linked to a lot of this scholarly work around the Nature's Futures framework, policy relevant topics, and design. Satu comes from a design background, and so we're also bringing these design perspectives with the aim of trying to build solidarity and responsibility for multi-species in decision making. And so this was taken yesterday, so it's happening as we speak in Tampere. But what we've done is we've moved from 2 projectors to 6 projectors. We've also hired a visual or audiovisual engineers to create what we call a seamless 360-degree experience, so that the environment you're in, there's no repetition between the different images. They're all joined together, so it feels like you're in that place. In addition, there are 9 separate speakers on 9 separate channels, enabling 9 separate sounds to be played to you at the same time. And this is a few pictures of Satu in there, I think yesterday. So we have some lounge chairs and other ways to just sit and listen and visualize. This is a forest environment. It's another one of the same environment. We're not only interested in charismatic species such as birds or forests. We're also interested in people's relationships with moss and lichen. I'm not sure exactly what this is, Satu. Is that a... But it is some form of moss. So, because we recognise that there are so-called unloved or unrecognised species out there too that we want to engage with in these environments. We don't just want this to be an individual experience, we want this to be a co-created experience. And so we're going to be recording the deliberations that occur in these dome environments with high school children, but also with policymakers and other actors who visit the dome over the coming month. So in particular, we're engaging, next slide. Yeah, in particular, we're engaging with approximately 20 environmental policymakers from Tampere and region who are currently helping develop this national nature restoration plan. We've also got a captive audience of 150 secondary school children from Tampere and region who are going to be engaged. And they're going to be engaged in what we're calling a 60-minute journey into the future, which Satu has developed. And this is just an example of some of the clips. So we'll start with, let's start our journey into the future. Let's walk out the door to the street and take a few big leaps to Kalpi, which is the area that we're focusing on in Tampere. Where exactly in Kalpi are you? In the forest, by the lake, on a mountain bike track? So we were trying to position them within a Pacific context. And now we're asking them to turn to the future. Tampere is now in 2050, a multi-species city that looks after the well-being of everyone, recognizing that this is a utopia. All humans, minority groups, nature, all species, ecosystems, water and carbon cycles, biodiversity and climate. Each of you is in a Pacific place that you chose. What do you see around you? What do you hear? What kind of nature is there? Which species live there? So this is all done in the audiovisual dome environment. So I can't really give you too many results because this is the work we're doing over the next 3 to 4 weeks. Here are just some reflections based upon the trials to date with the dome. It's particularly challenging to get environmental policymakers, not so much attending, but actively engaged in these different environments because they're coming in with all their baggage around what they must do in relation to delivering targets or achieving certain administrative tasks. In fact, in Satu's early interviews, many of them said they haven't had time to even do envisioning exercises before. They're just so focused on the here and now. There's also some challenges regarding, even if they engage with visions, they often apply technocratic logics to that, meaning they're seeking direct and indirect drivers of change or how certain ways we go about managing the landscape now will affect how it looks in the future, without necessarily engaging with larger imaginaries about what they would like the future landscape to look like, not only for humans, but also other species. The audiovisual dome is a way for policymakers and the public to imagine desired futures without constraints, but we haven't been so good as yet of recognizing the constraints and the trade-offs in the dome environment, because that requires new ways of visualizing those trade-offs. And we also need to recognize that there are representational biases in the dome, so bias towards positive human, other species or interspecies well-being outcomes, and how to represent interspecies concerns in an ethically responsible way is something that we have not explored. And of course, there's multiple technological challenges to create ambitious yet realistic and feasible realizations of future landscapes. So I think this is my final slide. The key messages is that audiovisual immersive environments enable different types of experimentally controlled encounters in both current and modeled future landscapes. It can promote perspective taking, which we hope can lead to solidarity and empathy with nature, and hopefully empathy with humans, and creating new types of knowledge co-creation environments which enable us to critically examine which species, ecosystems, and humans are represented or indeed excluded in nature restoration planning is critical going forward. And I think these dome environments provide one way to research that. Just a quick plug, if you're wanting to see the dome, you're welcome to come to Tampere between on the 21st, 22nd of May. If you can't make those dates, let me know. We'll try to provide you an advanced viewing. But please check out the MUST website if you're wanting to know more about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We are going to do both the keynotes and then we're going to have a discussion afterward. I'd like to give the floor to Sabahetta.
Yes. Thank you. Do you hear me well if I speak like this from here? Great. Okay. Hello again. So this is the last speech for these 2 days and before the wrap up of the conference. And I will talk about the forthcoming book, that's fine, which is called Socio-Ecological Transformations, Linking Ontologies with Structures, Personal with Collective Change. So it is an edited volume with about 15 chapters, 28 contributors, and actually I will say that in my slides, but it will be coming out in hopefully August, September. It's taking a while. We have submitted it already in January, I think. Okay, great. So in this talk, I will first say something about the book and will position it in the transformations literature. Then I will provide an overview of the book, including all the 15 chapters, really briefly, saying one word per each or one sentence. Then I'll focus quite a lot on the main premises for today of the book, and then try to linkage, if I have hopefully time, I'm really a bit concerned with my time. I try to link how all of this discussion relates to multi-species justice and the modern human, so the theme of the day. Next slide, please. So the book aims and positioning in the transformation literature. So you can see on the left there are certain trends in transformations literature to which this book aims to respond. And much more is said about each of those trends in the chapter, in the book, but here I will just read them and then I will go on. So number one is the apolitical and ahistorical framing of transformation, so which is like one tendency. Then there is a kind of quite an opposite response to this first trend, which is then the overemphasis on the structures. So all the structural systemic issues vis-a-vis or like on perhaps on the cost on the ontological basis of those structural issues and violences. And then this leads to framing the responses or the efforts for the transformations just in terms of kind of social movements and activism as the only viable means or strategies or responses to this violence and destruction, and therefore as a kind of radical transformations. So next click, yes. Then in response to those trends, the book first number 01 aims to or reclaims socio-ecological transformation as by definition radical justice-centered theory praxis, and by definition because it addresses the deeper roots of the structural socio-ecological violence, which is number 2, which you see there, that the material is dualist ontology, which is framed as the basis for the colonial racial capitalist structural, therefore, violence. And I say the basis because it discursively justifies, legitimizes, and normalizes such violence and oppression. So then this in turn, number 3, so the third contribution or aim, broadens the spectrum of viable means and strategies for transformation. So beyond, so I'm not saying that the that social movements and activism is not important, but it broadens the responses to include, in addition to movements and activism, those that challenge and seek to unlearn and undo the ontological basis of our socio-ecological crisis. So the human separations and exceptionalism, as well as other hierarchies of worth, including those among humans. So then we go next slide. I want just to highlight two disclaimers. That first, that we do not downplay the structural constraints and aspects, but put those in dialogue with the ontological and structural, arguing that the two are two faces of the same issue, and that the transformations requires recognizing this and working with both. So it's not like we are saying, oh, this is trash, we go on. And number two, that my talk will not capture the really vibrant contributions of different approaches and cases presented in the 15 chapters by 28 scholars from 16 countries of origin. This talk is based on the introductory and two introductory chapters and concluding chapter that try to be to bring the personal and ontological on the one hand in connection, and collective and structural on the other. So the book should be coming out, as I said, in the autumn, and there will be book promotion events, and we will be advertising them by the website. Okay, next slide. So the book is not separated. It is it's a continuum of those 15 chapters, but there is a certain logic how those chapters are put in order. So the first 5 that you're seeing now there, they are mostly concerned with ontologies and worldviews and their role in transformations. They can be described as an onto-epistemic inquiry of coexistence and ways of co-becoming in the world. So the worlding, the ontology, and how the ontologies, praxis, and experiences shape one another. Then click, please. The second or the next 7 chapters are based on examples or efforts for transformative change. And here I will try to do some justice to those really excellent contributions. So Jauhola and colleagues, they show the importance of embedding transformations and transformative initiatives in the ethics of care as a way of avoiding reproducing violence in transformation agenda, which they argue and show examples when this happens. Minoya and Taher present struggle from ongoing colonization and genocide of Palestinian lands, and scholasticides also in Palestine as well as in Ecuador. Kotari looks at a variety of alternatives emerging from the ground, from various initiatives across India, and some also out of India. Then the Badga Onkar, and others document co-creation efforts addressing structural violence of negligence in waste management by co-creating strategies based on indigenous knowledges and practice in Mumbai in India. Further, then we have small-scale farming as ecological livelihood in Finland, and challenging dominant forestry model in Sweden, presented by Kallio and Houtbeckers and Holmgren and colleagues, respectively, for those 2 chapters. And finally, civil society and citizen efforts to bring for degrowth tourism in Barcelona, Spain, by Sekulova and Isselhorn. And then so those were the examples of efforts where the ontological and the structural meet, giving rise to a range of practices and strategies for change. And then finally, next slide, the next click. The last 2 chapters before concluding, one present cases of co-optation of transformations with policies within the policy circles by Elke Verhage and myself. That's one of the talks that I had yesterday, was this one chapter. Okay, so then we go to the main points, I believe, which are on the next slide. Yes. I'm thinking I should sit for this one. It's a bit long. Hope you don't mind. So keeping in mind, thank you, this rich material, I picked 3 main messages to cover today. So number 1, materialist dualist worldview that informs, shapes, and enables unwise, self-destructive, self being here much more expanding category, destructive and predatory policies and institutions, technologies, ways of being and living and dying. At the risk of oversimplifying things, I place the materialist and the dualist ontological positions together, and I use the term materialist dualist position. So the materialist position, well, yeah, this might not be the best time to get philosophical, but I will risk and will speak for another 5, 6, 7, depends how many minutes, to make some points. So the materialist position portrays the nature of reality as consisting of non-intelligent matter, which arguably produces intelligent life, capable of self-cognition and self-awareness. This understanding of reality is the backbone of the dominant materialist metaphysics, and that postulates that the universe and nature are unintelligent, mechanistic, and void of consciousness, into which then the conscious humans are born and then live up on their death as a mere observers of the material objective reality and the world out there, separate from them. And then the dualist position, which separates specifically human from other than human, or from the rest of nature, is embedded within this materialist metaphysics or materialist position, ontological position. So I put them together to say that materialist dualist positions separate mind from matter, suggesting that the matter is an ontological primitive or ontological primary, meaning that that irreducible objective or absolute entity that does not need to be described in terms of or in relation to other things and entities. And from there, then there is a separation between body from mind, object from subject, observer from the observed, and so on. So as we know, this way of thinking and knowing the world and the nature of reality has led to advancements in science and technology, development of analytical lenses and theories about nature of reality, including our own nature and our roles and relations in and with the world. But it has also led to creating binaries and hierarchies: human, non-human, man, woman, black, white, cis, transgender, material, non-material, etc., wealth, etc., etc. So this then have provided the ground for grave injustices and violence, including ecocide, genocide, colonialism, racism, patriarchy, speciesism, sexism, and other isms. So the concepts and hierarchies that are constructed as a mean of knowing or observing the interrelated entities as integral parts of the whole have been taken to represent the actual objective reality. So then this materialist dualist worldview stands in direct contradiction with a wide spectrum of ontological positions that explain the nature of reality and existence as being and becoming in relations and or in non-dual terms. Such ontologies emerge from a wide variety of ancient Eastern, Southern, indigenous sciences, cosmologies, and philosophies of life, but also some Western philosophies which were marginalized in favor of duality and materialism. And in the book, we outline a few relational and non-dual ontological positions. I can now stand up. I'm out of the dense speech. A drawing from Brazilian indigenous ancestral knowledges, the Eastern philosophies of oneness, as well as some more recent Western academic debates that resonate and largely build on non-Western ones, including the analytical idealism by Bernardo Kastrup, Mario Blasser's work on political ontology, and so on and so forth. And then if you can, or you have it all. Oh, no, go back, sorry. Yeah, good. So number 2 now, Once we enter this ontological debate, we also enter the psyche, the personal and the collective psyche. So zooming into the personal realm is important for revisiting our roles and responsibilities in the web of life, our ways of being in and as relations, and what that means for our current socio-ecological state. And I must emphasize here that this focus on the personal does not imply a shift of responsibility or blame from structures and institutions to individual behavior, but it does call for some more reflections, as we have been also hearing this morning, for reflecting and facing our own biases, privileges, complicities of our lifestyles, of our culture, or our way of being and doing, that contributes to the general broader situation. It also calls for realizing the power and role that we as interconnected relational beings have. So this personal ontological shift, we argue in the book, so this realization of our interconnectedness and existing beyond our immediate experience of separation. So we are not saying that we are not separate. Of course, that is that immediate experience, but also understanding that that's also only one facet of how we are in the world, can be a powerful tool for changing and healing across personal, collective, and planetary spheres. And finally, while this is not the main point, the number 3 there, call for political solidarity. And in the last chapter, we do use the possibility to highlight the tension between the diverse agendas, movements, and approaches for transformations, and the challenge to ensure heterogeneity and difference while nurturing solidarity and collaboration. Okay, now finally we move to the next chapter. How I'm doing with time. Okay, perfect. So here's to point out then that while the whole idea for today's conference has been, the focus on the multi-species and more than human, was really that self-reflection, that this is the component in the Just Globe that we haven't addressed in the Just Globe project when we have been theorizing justice. We haven't really engaged explicitly the multi-species, even though I've been reading about it and hearing about it. But so with this, we wanted to kind of complement that. But then when I was writing this book, and so by the end of the project, and engaging with these ontological questions, and then when I was reading the work of our other keynote speakers, I realized that, well, there's a lot of similarities here. So similarity like those from 1 to 4. So colonial, racial, capitalist violence and destruction are also starting point for multi-species justice. Cannot hear me? No. Oh, I'm sorry. Are also the starting point for their framing of multi-species justice too. Transformations is also an aim. Rejection of dualist ontology and the call for relational ontology are the basis. It's also an opportunity to question, unlearn, and undo modernity, duality, coloniality, and to imagine different becomings. But where multi-species justice as framed in for instance, David's and some of their colleagues in Daniele's work, in their writing, but it expands our and other contemporary scholarly horizons, is the gaze of justice beyond the natural or living entities, such as so like the living entities like animals, plants, fungi, microorganisms, and ecosystems like rivers and mountains. They extend this gaze to also non-organic or non-living materials and elements. So this was really interesting to read and something to think about. It is this non-organic gaze that I'm hoping to be able to also explore. And this is a final note, just closing words, that I'm excited that in the upcoming project that we will be starting in October, I'll be able to explore much more and to understand and engage with the work that has been presented here today. So on the multi-species and more than human elements in the new project that we are starting in October. It's a Horizon Europe project. It's called Arctic Nose. So we will be learning in this project with and from the indigenous peoples of Arctic about multi-species worlding and justice, among others. While so with that, I thank you so much for your attention. I thought.
So we now have time for questions, comments, interventions. We've got about 25 minutes together. I know this afternoon there were some funny things with the microphones in this room. So we're going to see if the traveling mic will work. And if it doesn't, then you guys can come up here. It'll be great. But let's first see if the traveling mic does it for us. Does anybody have any questions or comments for okay, so let's first go to this corner.
And this, does it work?
It does work.
Wonderful.
For the moment.
It works perfectly for me. My question goes to Chris. Yeah, Chris, thank you very much. I really enjoy the work that your team are working on. But my question is, since the visual audio doom is something like a created environment, so I was wondering whether you are also doing some studies where you are comparing maybe real life situation to see how it's affecting people differently. If you can comment a bit on that.
Yeah, terrific point. So this, I did not present on the other researcher who's involved in this work is a postdoc named Jonathan Karathas-Jones, and he's doing exactly that. He's comparing the experiences in actual environments, i.e. on sound walks, and the virtual environments. Indeed, these students that I mentioned, they're going to be participating in a 1-hour sound walk one day ahead of the dome experience. And what he's interested in doing is comparing multi-species experiences in existing and in virtual environments. It's quite an interesting set of theoretical questions there around representation, but also framing, because in these dome environments, we're having to create some boundaries around what we present and don't present, which is more restrictive than what is seen in the real world. So, yeah.
Taking off on that question, a curiosity, so we're kind of in brainstorming mode, would be to introduce the element of time, and maybe you've already thought of this. So, and then comparing to a natural, so you could have two sets, 15 minutes, an hour, and 5 hours. I'm just making this up. And then in the dome and outside the dome. Have you already thought about that? And is there a factor of time, do you think?
In terms of time in the dome, that's a really good question. We haven't looked at that exactly. We've been thinking about this in the context of current nature and you're right, future environments, i.e. environments that are preferred or idealized by 2050, but not necessarily in the context of how long people spend in the dome. We face a lot of restrictions there. For example, pragmatic restrictions around how long we can have students away from their traditional classroom. Generally, we have to fit into a 1.5 hour lesson time, and the students require 15 minutes to walk to this space and 15 minutes to get back. And we're already taking on 2 separate lesson times of the students, one for the sound walk and one for the dome experience. For policymakers, they have other restrictions on their time, and they too tend to be reluctant to be away for more than 2 hours from their work, unless there is a very good justification for being there. But yeah, really good point. It could be maybe some experimental work for the general public on that one first.
Not everybody at once.
Thank you. My question is for Sabaheta, although if Chris wants to answer, you may, although he's my supervisor, so maybe he knows where this question's coming from. I was looking at the bullet point that was up earlier, like aiming for transformations, I think was the wording. And I'm just really curious about a lot of this work around sustainability transformations. It very much is ready to admit that we don't know exactly what needs to be transformed. We know that a lot of the systems that need to be transformed are interlinking. So change in one part of the system does not necessarily imply change in the other part, and maybe actually those two changes might conflict with one another, and so on and so on. It's exceedingly complicated to make this happen. So I'm just curious if you've had discussions about this kind of research, which is open to learning about a transformation that you don't know will happen yet, or you don't know what that transformation looks like. How do you engage with that level of unknown?
Absolutely good question and bad wording from my side. I was in the last slide. I probably had text to open up on each of those, but then I was like, oh, I'll just read them through and say the last part and to say about Arctic nose. Transformations and aiming in transformation in this context. So if you remember, like if you, sorry, not remember, but if you put it in the context of what I was talking, it's basically refers to what Danny in the morning said, this interruption of how we, see things, how we see nature of reality, how we see ourselves in relations to others. So really a very big word for something that I was thinking of, a specific thing. So it aims to break out of the current mental imaginaries about what I was, speaking here quite lengthily and maybe a bit difficult to follow. Apologies about that. But that is what I meant. Not yesterday we were talking quite a lot, and I think I saw you at least in some of the sessions that I was specifically also saying this issue that we don't know where we are going. We are. It's not like we know the aim and then we need to go to there. So absolutely valid point. Transformations in this context was something else. Sorry.
Next person.
All right, over to this side. You guys come closer. Don't be so shy. Stay up here. Come on.
G'day, Nikolai Semes from Waipapa. I have a question for Christopher. Fantastic talk. I'm very interested in your acoustic encounters. I work with winemakers, and part of their training is they get taught how to listen to microbes. You can hear the difference between a bacterial ferment and a fungal ferment. But I was just thinking about your biophony versus anthrophony. Something like fermentation, it's human guided, but it's yeasts that are making the sound. So it's sort of a collaborative, more than human soundscape. Is that something that fits into your, I'm sure in urban contexts that would be similar as well?
Oh, that's brilliant. I have never thought of that type of relational intervention on sound. No, we're not testing that directly, but I'd be really interested to talk to you about that, recognizing that that is an example of these interdependent engagements. I mean, similar analogies can be made between the baker and the bread, or the yeast and the bread maker, or the yeast and the baker. But yeah, that could be another way to communicate these interlinked relationships. We are focusing on nature restoration planning and NBS planning in the context of the work at the moment, but yeah, there might be some other examples that we could draw upon to represent those interlinked relationships. Yeah, thank you for the idea. Yeah.
I think it's a sign that it's toward the end of the day, isn't it? But oh, sorry, already with David. Woo,
Sorry.
missed it. Maybe I'm at the end of my day.
This is for Chris as well, and I should probably know the answer to this, but how manipulable is the presentation? So I'm just thinking back, it was like 20 years ago, I was working with ecologists on a landscape scale and doing deliberative democratic processes, but illustrating in real time the impact on trees and species. Not quite in real time. I mean, the ecologists would go off and do some number crunching over lunch, and just to illustrate to people what their decision making or where their consensus areas, what it would look like. And I'm just curious whether, especially the opportunity to put policymakers in a dome and to show them what happens if they do X, Y, or Z. Right? Is there a way? I mean, is that a possibility of just sort of having that lived experience of different kinds of futures?
Yeah. In fact, you've almost covered the idea of my ARC professorship, David. But or not ARC, the Finnish Research Council fellowship, academic professorship, should I say? Yeah, but what you're raising is a really interesting point. The AI provides opportunities now to assess social learning on the fly, which I call iterative learning. That you can present a set of immersions, they can deliberate on that, and then you can use the modeling capabilities associated with AI to represent those futures to them that they have decided upon. And then you can further iterate and represent new futures and the consequences of those futures based upon their iteration. That is computationally very intensive, huge amounts of data, and also very powerful machines to be able to computate on the fly like that. But the technology now exists in ways that it did not exist 5 to 10 years ago. I've been doing a lot of work around deliberative valuation, where we deliberate with stakeholders. We spend a week or two to collate results. We present back, and then we might have another session, but you lose a lot of people along the way. Whereas these new technologies would enable you to have an iterative session in one day or less, and capture those people and those sentiments in the room. So yeah, I think there's some really interesting research questions there around the role of technology in mediating that learning, and also some super challenging technical questions around how do you get these things represented so quickly. It's one thing to represent them, it's another thing to represent them in a way that is meaningful to the participants and reflects their realities. That is very challenging to do. We've been doing some of that work in the serious game environment as well, but to get the context and the boundary conditions set up in ways that is relevant for policymakers is super challenging.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Louisa from Newcastle Uni in the UK. I was just what you were saying there. I was wondering what crossovers the Dome encounter experience has with existing art immersive experiences, because it's still a sort of representation of nature that is still guided, and I imagine there's quite a lot of more than human artists. Is this considered an artistic project or a scientific project or both, if we're rejecting all boundaries?
Yeah, good question. I think it's a bit of both, and I certainly Sartre could talk to this, but it's essentially where design meets science. And agreed, we are, as humans, as researchers, still imposing framings around what nature and what other species look like, but we're drawing upon big data sets to do that. So to give you an idea, we have 27 acoustic monitors spread across Finland, which are recording continuously 1 in every 10 minutes. We're taking snippets of that data, bringing that into the dome, synchronizing that with visual data that is recorded from those same sites. That's a huge amount of data unto itself. But we are still being selective. We're selecting the frames to present to participants. We're selecting the species to represent. There are some implicit biases there. And so human subjectivity still has a role. What would be really interesting to do is, maybe linking back to David's point, I've just thought about this now, is whether these AI tools could learn from the engagements of other species, so that the futures that are represented are affected not only by what people are saying in the dome, but what other species are saying through the acoustics that are being presented in the dome. That's getting into animal and behavioral psychology. But yeah, I think that is the big challenge I think we all face in the MSJ space, that we talk about the need to represent these other species, but we cannot directly represent them. We have to be spokespersons for them. But maybe in future years, we can bring those wider perspectives in with less human bias.
Do we still have questions?
No, there haven't.
So can I ask one quick question just to conclude? Still, sorry for Professor Raymond. Are you thinking, when you're interacting with policymakers and decision makers, I understand you're using the virtual environment as a means to do you get the impression, or do you have discussions whether that could be interpreted as an end? Because every time I hear virtual nature environment, I think about 3 museums and even worse, because we are in nature. A lot of cities, we are nature deprived. And so I'm thinking whether people could pick that up as an idea to just have an experience in a city and just forget about trees in cities. I'm wondering if there are conversations about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's probably a point to note for SATA, because you're going out in the field with policymakers over the next couple of weeks. My worry, I suppose, is that a lot of the policymakers will focus on the charismatic sounds and the charismatic species that are presented in the room and forget the wider biological processes or the human or the trade-offs associated with these different environments that are being visualized and represented. So yeah, I cannot fully answer it. I think that's more of a worry at the moment. What we have not done yet is represent the different costs and harms to both humans and other species in these environments. We are focusing on desirable futures, but I think that would, by representing those harms, we may be able to get to some of the points you just mentioned. But yeah, I don't have any conclusive answers on those questions at the moment, but very relevant.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I think I get the feeling that we're really hitting the 5 o'clock hour. So I think we'll leave it there for the question. Oh, one more? Well, you have to wait for the microphone. You guys weren't all putting your hands up a minute ago. Okay, this will be our true last question.
Yeah, it's the last one. In fact, it's a bit of a tough one I think, for Christopher, because I really like the whole thing and the whole device. But at the end of the day, when you put at the end the lesson learned, for example, we find that policymaker, they don't have really time. Then the other thing is that the solution gives is more technological one on biodiversity. And then after, for the key messages, we can promote solidarity. That honestly found it quite classical. I would have expected that they don't have time. I would have expected they're quite technological. And I would have expected, of course, the key message is a bit to go for solidarity and empathy. Then after that, I would like, what did you surprise you? What did you you did all this process, and what did you even learn that found it, oh, that's quite cool, that's quite new, that's something I can work on, that's something I can trigger for the future. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are indeed asking those questions. So we're not only engaging in activities, but we also have some evaluative questions around what they've learned about nature restoration and the consequences of different actions, whether they be policy actions or more applied actions in the resulting from these different representations. We're also asking questions around the strengths and weaknesses of the audio visualizations themselves, which is more of a methodological question around how they can be improved, changed, modified to make them more salient to their policy and decision contexts. And we're asking them those questions at an individual level through pre and post surveys, so pre going into the dome, after going the dome. Also, we're asking them as collective questions during the dome experience. So there's 3 levels to this. There's the individual, pre and post, and then there's the collective experience. And maybe we might also do some interviews a few weeks after the experience, recognizing that there are some temporal effects of asking people directly after an experience. But maybe just in conclusion, why we're going through all this effort is that we as scientists, also we as the general public and policymakers and practitioners still have very little understanding of the different dimensions of biodiversity, and even less understanding of these interspecies interactions and what that means for our well-being as a collective. And we are trying to find new ways to foster those understandings in these audiovisual environments in ways that are very difficult to do from an experimental perspective in real life nature environments. Thanks.
All right, let's give a hand for both of our lovely keynotes.